Hello and welcome to the Built Around You podcast, the podcast dedicated to people building, renovating or upgrading their home. Why is building a home so complex and stressful? Why do building projects run over time and budget? Welcome to the podcast Built Around You. On today's episode, we meet with Sharon Holland, who has renovated her old family home in Ladysbridge in East Cork. Sharon, of course, was on Cheap Irish Homes recently on the renovation feature that I interviewed her on. So no stranger to the airwaves. Sharon, you're very welcome.
Thanks very much, Kieran. It's nice to be back chatting to you.
So Sharon, tell me a little bit about yourself, your family, and your backstory, I suppose.
I suppose where to start. I'm originally from Laois, came to Cork for college many years ago. I've been in Cork for longer than I was in Laois at this point now. Met Ger, and after we got married, moved down to Ladysbridge. So after we got married, we purchased a house from our parents-in-law. It was actually the bungalow that they had built when they got married. And we lived there for about, I suppose, 13 years, thereabouts. And Ger's parents approached us maybe, I'd say at this stage, I was trying to think earlier on today, about 4 years ago altogether. They were doing, I suppose, a bit of legacy planning and planning for their, for this stage of their lives. And what they proposed to us at least was that we do a house swap. Whereby they would move back to the bungalow that they had sold us, which they built when they originally got married all those years ago, and that we would move into the family farmhouse and take that on. So that was about 4 years ago. I suppose we took a bit of time to think about it and decided that, actually it was a great opportunity, and it would be a great opportunity for our girls as well. So we've 3 children. I have Cian from a previous relationship. Cian turned 24 today, actually.
Right.
And then the 2 girls are 13 and 11. So they keep us very busy. So a nice opportunity for us as a family, and I suppose a legacy for the girls as well going forward for the next generation. Keep it in the family.
So it was an unusual setup to some extent. I mean, like the one thing in Ireland is that it's people with younger families are looking to the future and going, well, look, our family is getting larger, the girls are getting older, we have different needs than we had when we got married or what have you. And of course, our parents then are kind of going, look, this house is a bit big for me and it's getting hard to heat. Yes. And what are we going to do? So you're looking to upsize, they're looking to downsize, and there was a meeting of minds then, and off you went.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So tell me a little bit about the house. Do you know when the house was built?
No, we've done a bit of research on that. I actually got in contact with a home genealogist, which I never realised existed.
It's a new one for me.
A lady based in the UK, and she was very interesting in the sense that she helped me to kind of track back some of the documentation and some of the records to figure out a little bit more about the house than we did know. We knew that it was on the first maps, the first census maps in Ireland. So we reckon the house itself was built, we can track it back to 1822, definitely, maybe a little earlier than that. The farm buildings then that surround the house may well date back to the 1770s, apologies. But again, we don't have any documentary evidence. It's more around the style, the positioning of them, things like that make us think that the materials and the craft. Okay. 200 years at least of age. Yeah.
I suppose yourself and Ger would have been coming at this from kind of slightly different angles. I mean, the house would have been very precious to Ger. Obviously, I mean, from having lived there himself and from visiting his grandparents there and back and all that. Whereas you're almost the blow-in, I suppose.
The blow-in,
from up the country, the cuckoo, yeah. Was there any, dare I say it, was there a pure meeting of minds, or was there some heated debates when there was thoughts of knocking down a wall or moving a window? Or?
God, we'd be partial to an old heated debate, all right, at times, like most couples, but there weren't actually very many heated debates in terms of our viewpoint on the house once, I suppose, we discussed the pros and cons of taking on the house and taking on the property, and was that an affordable thing for us to do? And, you know, even things like it forced us in a way to think about our own legacy in terms of the future, because whilst we wanted to take it on, we wanted to do it in a way that was affordable and that would allow us to retire at a reasonable age. You know, this was something we hadn't really spoken a lot about as a couple. And it forced us to have those kinds of conversations, but also to think about, well, if we're going to do this affordably, what standard do we want and what compromises are we going to have to make? What are the non-negotiables in terms of things that need to be improved, and what can we compromise on and wait to do down the line? So one of the things that we did early on was literally just sat down with the graph pad. Like, my background is as a geography teacher, so I'd have a little bit of mapping skills. So sat down with the graph pad very rudimentarily and drew out the plans without actually naming the rooms for what they were, and said, well, how would it be? The kitchen currently is down the south end, but how would it be if we moved the kitchen down to what was the formal living room? Or how would it be if the kitchen was right in the centre of the house?
Yeah, you really have to detach yourself from the house and what you know to be the house, and go afresh.
Yeah.
Like, I know, we renovated our house a year and a half ago, and we lived in the house for 6 months during the lockdown, and we had some attachment because it was a lockdown, a holiday almost, living in a house we just bought. It was so new to us, but we had a little bit of attachment because it was a kind of cottage as well.
Yeah.
Well, it was a cottage. But like you say, there's I personally, I think there's pros and cons to living in a house.
Yeah.
Like in our situation, we lived. If I hadn't lived there, I probably would have designed it slightly differently. Having lived there was little nuances that I really only appreciate having lived there. But as you rightly say, you do have to step back a little bit because you can get a little bit closed into what's so familiar to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think particularly in terms of the living space downstairs, I know when you came out with Cheap Irish Homes, you know, we talked about the fact that you have that central entry point with the two quite significant sized rooms either side.
A real Georgian setup.
Real Georgian setup, you know, very traditional setup in that regard. You know, we definitely did look at if either of those rooms could be the kitchen come diner.
Yeah, I suppose like the thing you're always looking at when you're building or renovating house is you know, you've design aspirations and you've a budget, and you're kind of going, well, I could do this, but it doesn't meet the budget. I could do this, which meets the budget, but it isn't great.
Absolutely.
And how do you find the balance? So it's value. A lot of people think of cost the whole time, and cost is of course very important, but at the end of the day, value is so much important. Are so important, and you need to drive value.
Yeah.
And I suppose, like, when you think of, I'm familiar with your house, of course, having been there with Cheap Irish Homes, and I know your outhouses and where they are.
Yeah.
I suppose whenever I'd be designing a house, I'm always conscious of like how far away is the kitchen from the hallway, because I always picture it's lashing rain and you're running into the hallway with your bags of shopping, and you need to get to the kitchen and quickly.
Yes.
So the further away the kitchen is, I always like to have it reasonably near the hallway, which is of course where you have it now. So tell me, what condition was the house in when you got there first, before you did anything?
Yeah, I suppose we were very lucky because structurally it was very sound, and it is very sound. The roof is in very good nick. You know, the walls, it's a stone-built house that has walls 3 feet, 4 feet thick on the gables, which provoked their own challenges. So it was really structurally sound. I think some of the challenges for us were the fact that we needed to look beyond the structure of the four walls and the roof. We needed to look at electrics and make sure that everything was okay, because I think with any house where you have different ages and stages, and different works having happened at different stages as well, you want to make sure that it's safe. You know,
that people aren't just adding on to the old electrical system.
Absolutely.
And whereas you might see a new wire here, actually there's a black wire just around the corner.
Exactly it. That's exactly it. And there was a bit of that. There was a lot of checking that needed to be done there. Plumbing was a bit of a challenge for us, really. We knew that was going to be a big investment. The original house with the two large rooms downstairs and what is 3 bedrooms upstairs, there was plumbing in part of it, which had been added in the 1970s. But then in one of the living rooms And in the master bedroom, actually upstairs, there was absolutely no heating system. So that was a challenge. And that was also the north-facing end of the house. So not great. And there was a bit of a mix going on. So you had some electric storage heaters in part of the house. And then the old kitchen, the bedroom above, and the utility out the back were powered by a Waterford Stanley range. So a mixture of oil and old-fashioned storage heaters. We did a lot of investigating. We got a couple of quotations. We very early eliminated the heat pump system because it just wasn't going to be feasible with the age of the house. Huge investment. And then we started looking, I suppose, at more traditional oil-fired systems, expanding on that. We realised, though, that we were going to have to do an awful lot of channeling, an awful lot of, groundworks and things like that.
I suppose, like, when I look at a house to begin with, like a house of your house's age, I mean, you're always looking to make sure you have a good structure because, I mean, you'd always know going in, okay, the electrics are going to have a question mark. You might be able to rescue some of them or none of them. The chances are of them all being rescuable are negligible because you'll probably be changing things anyway, so you're going to straight away be adding electrics then. The plumbing it has an even higher chance of not being rescuable. And then you're looking at windows. That may or may not work. If they're an old sash window, you might, even though it's single glazed, I know you have a beautiful old Georgian facade. But if they're an old sash window, you might try and keep them. If they're single glazed and in good condition. And of course, you're almost discounting any level of insulation because that's probably reasonably negligible. But you also looked at the space of the house, and you're familiar with it from having been over there with Georgian on holidays and whatever. And tell me, how did you decide on the sorting out the kitchen space you were talking about?
So I suppose having looked at all the different options downstairs, we decided, based on the orientation of the house really, that we wanted to go at the southern end of the house. It's we all live in our kitchens these days. So we wanted to go out that end. The layout was such that the old kitchen was on the southern gable, but there was no south-facing windows. So there was one small door. I suppose light wasn't the priority, and that end of the house faces out into the farmyard. So I suppose that farmyard now isn't an active farmyard, so it's easier to look at it in a romantic manner, whereas it was a very functional thing in its day. So it was actually the kitchen maker that suggested going out through the gable, expanding out in a linear fashion in order to pull in as much light right the way through the day, through the east, south and west. And he also suggested the broken plan. He really came up with two ideas for us: a very open plan kitchen, where you had the existing old kitchen merging with the new section, or a broken plan whereby you retained a sense, or a strong sense, of the floor plan of the original kitchen, but then expanded through the gable on two sides, leaving the range cooker in the centre. And we really liked that idea of retaining the old kitchen as our dining space with the range, and that kind of, I always call the range like a hug in the kitchen. I think there's something about it, especially in an old farmhouse. Yeah,
and I suppose you're looking to link in with the old house as well, and obviously you have to be sensitive of your husband's connection with the old house and your own connection to the old house as well, and linking into that. I suppose when you look at old Georgian houses, they're beautiful on the outside, and they're beautiful if you walk through on the inside. There's lovely grandeur and everything else. But the big difference between houses that were built in the olden days and how are designed in the olden days and houses that are designed now is a good house now should be designed from the inside out. Whereas in the olden days, they used to design houses from the outside in. And when you look at the Georgian house, it's beautiful on the outside, and typically it's one big square. And of course, it doesn't necessarily take any account of where the sun rises, where the sun sets, and all that sort of things. So, like, when you looked at your house, I mean, your kitchen designer gave you great advice, because, like, when you're looking at the southern elevation, which is where most of your daylight is, you want to be maximising the sunlight, because, like, you'll be spending most of your time, as you say, in a modern living space, an open plan space, which is where we all typically spend our time now. And now you've access to southerly light, and you were saying that you're near the old farmyard, so you're able to kind of to pour out into where the outhouses and the courtyard and all that were.
Yeah.
So a great bit of advice there.
Yeah, it really was.
So so you got the advice. You thought, okay, this is where we're going. And what was the next step? Did you have to go for planning permission, or?
We didn't actually. So we had sourced at this stage. I suppose we had our kitchen maker on board. We had our building company on board, and I suppose a critical piece of work in that, I feel, and I suppose a tip that I would give is that if you're dealing with an older house, make sure that you are taking on tradespeople or a building company, if you're going that less direct labour route, that have experience in dealing with older houses.
Okay.
Because I suppose, like you said a couple of minutes ago there, Kieran, when something goes wrong, things go wrong on all projects, but there's probably a higher risk factor with an older house, because once you start opening walls and things, you really don't know what you're going to find. You're dealing with old stonework and so on. So, we really felt comfortable based on the experience of the building company. The building started in August 2021. I suppose we're lucky in that both Ger and I work in secondary schools, so we had the month of July to play with. So we got a certain amount of, in the bedrooms, for example, we got a certain amount of the visual work that needed to be done. So we got painting done. We got that kind of the lower level stuff done to get us started before the builders arrived on site. Even though once they started the whole place, look, it took an awful lot to bring it back to where it was in June.
You were optimistic starting the
going
painting.
Forward and then going about, 2 steps forward and 10 steps backwards. But it kind of worked eventually. But once the builders came on site, they were due to arrive mid-July. They were delayed until early August. They started in early August, and we were in with 99% of everything that we wanted to achieve or expected to achieve achieved by Christmas 2021. So that was phenomenal going.
And of course, there's nothing a builder loves more than being told we want to be in by Christmas. You can't move Christmas.
It's the stereotype, isn't it? Yeah, it is the big stereotype.
So tell me, so you did the extension. What else was done to the house?
So we did the extension, which obviously tore the whole dining room apart as well. We completely reinvigorated the bathroom, completely changed the layout, ripped everything out there in terms of plumbing and started from scratch, changed the floor plan and so on, and everything that goes with that. So that room was basically gutted. The same thing with regard to the ensuite in the master bedroom. So completely changed the layout there, pulled everything out and started from scratch.
I suppose one thing I'm conscious, like you're talking about, you'd moved a few toilets and bathroom, like
showers, baths, everything.
Like I'm never too vexed by moving a bedroom, because a bedroom and a sitting room are almost the same room. They're four walls with skirting board and a window and whatever. But you start moving bathroom wear and toilets. And had you to move sewers?
We didn't have to move sewers. We were lucky in that regard. But there was a lot of creative engagement, I would say, needed by the plumber working in collab with the builders. We did have to look at our main family bathroom is located on the turn of our stairs at the back of the house. So it would have been an addition to the house, because obviously there wouldn't have been an indoor toilet, in the Georgian era. So it was an addition. So one of the things we wanted to look at was it structurally okay, were the timbers there that were going to be propping up my lovely baths? Was I going to come down through them?
Of course, when you fit a bath with all the with filling with water, I mean,
absolutely,
there's a ton weight in that. So
there was kind of looking at the structure, looking at the timbers that were there, checking did we need to reinforce anything. We were okay on the sewers front. We were lucky in that regard. But the bathroom and the ensuite ended up being quite an expense for sure.
Because from my point of view, I always tell clients, like, the most expensive room to move is a bathroom, because like you were lucky, but you often have to move sewers. And if you're renovating an old house, you could be suddenly tying into a clay sewer. A clay sewer can be problematic. So you might have to rip out all the sewers
Yeah.
and take them way out down the garden, kind of out of harm's way.
Yeah.
And of course, depending, like if you've concrete floors, you're hacking up concrete to get at the sewers. If you have a suspended timber floor, you're losing all your lovely old floorboards.
That's it.
So it's very invasive work, and every time you move a toilet and redecorate a toilet, it's the highest cost per square meter room in the house because
yeah.
you have tiling on the walls, you have tiling on the floors, you have maybe £2,000 worth of bathroom wear, £3,000 worth of bathroom wear, depending on what you're doing. You have showers, you have all the plumbing, you've dedicated electrics going to your showers, you have electric showers.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be going into moving a bathroom without my eyes open anyway, certainly.
Yes,
But
yes.
but it's all worked for you anyway, clearly.
Oh, it
yeah.
has, yeah. It's worked out very well. So we came across electric cast radiators.
They're run electrically.
They
anyway,
run
yeah.
electrically. Yeah, you can plug them in. You can hardwire them in your bathrooms, and they are. They operate really, really well. I suppose one of my big worries with electric radiators was, oh my God, is the bill just going to be crazy?
Electrical radiators have dramatically improved in the last even 5 years. I mean, we've all known of the storage radiators, which weren't the worst, but there was older electrical radiators then were a bit of a disaster. But I suppose okay, your electrical bills will be up a fair bit this year because everyone's electrical bills are coming up.
Yeah, yeah.
I suppose one option you potentially have there is photovoltaic panels because, okay, your bills, like us all, will be well up this year just because of the energy crisis. But with photovoltaic panels, because your heating is largely electric, the photovoltaic solar panels actually generate electricity. No, they don't come, they're an expensive outlay to begin with. You could be spending 10,000 euros, but it's an initial down payment. You get a grant for them. And of course, when you have those panels, they will generate electricity. Now, they generate an awful lot in the summer, more than you'll need.
Yes.
They generate less in the winter when you'll need it most. But you can sell the excess in the summer back to the ESB, or you can store it in batteries for use at night and whatever you. Or in depending on your heating setup and the photovoltaic setup, you can actually import some of the stored energy as heat for your hot water storage system, depending on how you set it up. And tell me, so you're painting an idyllic picture of a building project that went swimmingly well. You didn't need planning. Everything ran smoothly. You got in by Christmas. Was there any low points or things that didn't quite work out as planned?
It wasn't idyllic. I suppose we decided to live on site, which was a practical decision because we didn't want to be wasting money renting, and we also felt confident in our builders that they would deliver for us by Christmas. So we felt, it's only going to be 6 months.
Well, they had much chance when
how
you were
bad can
living
it
in the
be?
house watching them every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
2 school teachers.
How bad can it be? Yeah. I know, nightmare scenario, for tradespeople. But
were you doing roll calls in the morning when everyone walked in?
No, definitely no roll calls. No, definitely no roll calls. Though there were a good share of days now, particularly as they were, trying to get through 4 feet thick of Georgian stone, to break through between the dining room that I landed. I do remember landing home one day and saying, "Oh my goodness, this is phenomenal," and they just all simultaneously shot me a look as if to say, "Don't even come in through the door, please go away and let us at what we're at." Me and my naive enthusiasm, there's a low point, exactly, bursting all of my dreams about how idyllic it was going to be. No, I suppose, it wasn't idyllic. Living on site in the midst of that isn't pleasant.
Trying to keep the dust
builder's
down must have been
the
phenomenal.
dirt. They were great in that, they kind of worked in such a way to allow us retain a cooker in the kitchen and a fridge for as long as they possibly could. But there did come a point then that just all had to go by the wayside. So for me, one of the low points was barbecuing on a small travel gas barbecue in, I think it was late November, in the dark.
Oh, God.
It was just miserable out in one of the outhouses. There were a lot of takeaway nights. There was a lot of that kind of thing. And to be honest, that's a cost when you're in the middle of a build as well. That's a cost.
But I think that's something that should be mentioned to our listeners as well. I know as a building contractor and having spoken to other contractors, like, whereas you are saving on rent when you're living on site, there's a world of headache, there's a world of stress.
Oh, yeah.
And a builder will charge you less if you're not living on site.
That's very interesting.
So, like if they have a vacant house where they can just go in and plow into it, they don't have to worry about raising dust when you're there. They don't have to worry about whether you need to be using the heating at night, or whether you need to be using the water is cut off or the electricity or whatever. They can just plow in and do it to their program rather than to do it to a combined program. There is a cost to that. And I suppose, look, that's something. No, it depends on the project. Some projects are much more geared to it than others, but it's maybe something worth considering.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
And was there anything else that was of a challenge, or like what did you learn yourself going through the project that
big
you
challenge,
might have foreseen?
Yeah, the big challenge for us, I suppose, was timing. You know, now that we're coming out of COVID, I don't know if any of us want to revisit it, but it was a COVID project. So there was a degree of uncertainty as to when we'd manage to get the move done, when would we manage to get the project rolling, were we going to get caught up in the midst of lockdowns and things like that. Now, luckily, the way the timing ended up going for us with the move happening in mid-2021, we were kind of coming out the far end, so we didn't end up caught in awful circumstances like some people did with lockdowns and delays and things like that. It could have been far worse. But I think that uncertainty that hung in the air was a stress factor. Definitely, there's no doubt about that. Aside from that, it was the day-to-day thing. It was the, as you said, are we going to have power on to put the washing machine on? Are we going to have clean clothes?
Are we
the
going
kids,
to have running water in the loo?
Running water in the loo, those kinds of things, making sure you had your gallon drums of water just in case. I remember leaving the kids' uniforms out on a ledge one day and coming back and just, they were, they didn't quite have to go to the bin, but... yeah, you learn by your mistakes.
Go to the washing machine,
they
and there
certainly
was no
had to
water
go
for the
through
washing machine.
Exactly. There was all of that kind of thing. And that's a stress.
Yeah.
That's a stress on relationships, and that's a stress on kids. And, you do have to factor that kind of thing in as well, Much and all as you think you're going to take it on the chin and it's a limited thing and it's all going to be ideal.
Initially it's a bit of fun, but after a while
it wears on you. It does. It grates on you. Yeah.
So if you were doing it all again, right, is there anything you do differently?
I'd certainly do it all again. We don't have any regrets in that regard. Is there anything that I would do differently? I think I would possibly try to factor in the solar panels as part of the initial build. It was something that from a very early stage we thought, no, that's down the line. We'll come back to that. And I think knowing what I know now, particularly even in the space of time since last Christmas, the way things have gone with the energy crisis and the increase in prices and all the rest, I think we could have been wise to include that as part of the initial programme of work and maybe make compromises on decor and things like that.
Well, I mean, a lot of people now are actively thinking about solar panels because of the energy crisis and because they know their electrical bills are going to dramatically increase, and they're not going to turn around and retrofit an air to water system to their house, which could be 30, 40, 50 grand, whereas 7, 8, 9, 10 grand for some level of photovoltaic on the roof is very doable. I suppose the only thing to remember about photovoltaic is if the budget is there is grant money for a couple of thousand, or a bit over a couple of thousand.
Yeah.
There is grant money available, and it's not invasive in the slightest, really, to retrofit it to your house. I mean, it could very well be fitted in a matter of days once you've people appointed and everything else. And there are SEI grants, as we said, for it, but you have to use a registered contractor. So it's kind of well worth keeping in mind. Is there anything else you'd change? Would you live in the house again? It all again?
I think moving into the house was one thing, but I think what we could have done was in the height of it, maybe taken a month-long period just to step back and say, no, actually, let's just let you push on and get on with it, because there was a month-long period that was just deeply uncomfortable. And the time of year, you know, it was, you know, November, the temperatures were cold. It was a little bit miserable. So I think from everybody's point of view, I think it would have been a more positive move to move out for a month, even if it was just to move in with family, or, you know, if it was a shorter term proposition. I think that would have been much more manageable and made life easier.
And is there any tips you'd give someone, outside of your own learning, is there any tips you'd give someone starting a journey like yours? Renovating an old Georgian house, shall
tips, I say? A couple of them, I suppose. The first one would be to not underestimate the cost of you know, the legals and the professional fees associated with what we did, I suppose, which was a swap and a transfer of properties. That was a significant cost. And it's funny, actually, watching the episode of Cheap Irish Homes recently, we went through some of the costings, you know, and a really I found the way that you put it really interesting, that we had spent a certain amount on the original house and actually a larger figure on the extension itself, which is interesting in itself. But part of that budget, or part of the quoted budget for the original house, would have been the legal side of the transfer and things like that. And it was quite significant. We certainly underestimated it. And as a result of underestimating it, it ate into certain parts of our budget then as well, and limited what we could and couldn't do in other rooms. So don't underestimate that side of it, would be one piece of advice. Don't underestimate the mortgage side of it. Now, I mean, we had a mortgage. We brought our mortgage with us from our original house to the house that we've moved into. And negotiate with the bank. You know, don't be afraid to go in and state your case. You know, I suppose we're lucky because we are both public sector workers and we have great job security. There's no two doubts about that. And from that point of view, I suppose a bank will see you as being a very viable customer. We moved off a tracker mortgage, which was, you know, a big decision to make. But we negotiated hard with the bank. And in negotiating hard with the bank, we got a tracker +1 deal. So what it meant was that when we transferred our mortgage, our existing mortgage, to the new property, and when we had to borrow, obviously, for the work that we wanted to do, when we combined those two debts, the bank eventually were willing to offer us the tracker rate, the ECB tracker rate, +1%.
Okay, so it's
which
like
is
a
still,
hybrid tracker.
It's like a hybrid tracker, exactly. So you're not quite retaining your tracker rate, but it's only 1%. You're not quite losing it either, you know. So it's only 1% on top. The other piece of advice, I suppose, that I would give people, and this is where, you know, I got great enjoyment out of the project as well. I love decor, I love interiors, I love those kind of fun bits. But what we did to really extend our budget was we sourced an awful lot of our decor, our furniture, our furnishings, etc., secondhand. And it stretched the budget absolutely hugely. It really did.
I know, like, when I look at an old house, and of course I've been to your house, I mean, when I look at a house that age, the two things I'm most worried about or concerned about or check as I walk around is, like, you're dealing with stone, the random rubble stone in the walls. So if you're like, you knocked an in gable wall, so you have to go to 4-foot stone. Going through stone is a nightmare. Going through block is an awful lot easier, because you start taking away a few stones out of an old wall, and next minute the whole wall comes down, or half the wall can come down to meet you. And of course the other thing is you're dealing with old timber in an old house. And for me, I'm always looking at are the rafters and the joists in your roof, are they all in good condition? And your first floor, and maybe even the ground floor, if you've suspended floors, which you likely have in an old building like that. In a roof, there are roof specialist companies who will go up and they'll do a survey of your roof timbers, and they'll make sure that all your roof timbers are in good working order, because it's a very specialised endeavour, whole timber science, and it's something that even moves beyond the standard civil engineering it's specialty. And if there is any kind of woodworm, or if there's any kind of dry rot or wet rot or whatever, these companies will actually go in, they'll treat it, and they'll give a warranty for it. So it's not it's by no means a free service, but it's very valuable, and it's something that will kind of keep me up all night in an old building.
Yes.
And of course you have things like we mentioned earlier on, old sewers. They could be clay sewers. I'd always get those looked at. that. I would tend to discount kind of plumbing and electrical because they're at a stage where you're going to be upgrading as you move things and extend and all that. But then, of course, at the end of the project, and again, I've seen your house, you end up with a beautiful old house with all the old character and the old rooms and the old joinery and the stairs and everything else. And of course, you have the beautiful new living space, which is a lovely addition to have as well, and brings modern living into an old building. And again, you're starting the beginnings of designing the house from the inside out rather than the typical old way that they did in Georgian area of designing from the outside in. So you're in the house now as of last Christmas?
Since June before, but in with in livable condition, and with everything pretty well finished since Christmas, and it's been functioning really well. We're feeling our way into it. We're still kind of playing around with room layouts and things like that a little bit and tweaking things in places.
Thank you very much for joining us on the
welcome.
podcast. It's an amazing story, and like I know from just talking to you on Cheap Irish Homes, like you've done it for incredibly, you've driven great value in your project. You've a wonderful home now, of course, and for. You might be handing it on to generation number 6 or 7, or who knows how all that's going to work.
Yeah,
so it's a lovely, it's a lovely family story down in East Cork. I wish you the very best. I must pop in someday for coffee when I'm passing, and say hello to Ger and all the family from me.
Yeah.
And thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks a million for having me.
So a wonderful story from Sharon and her beautiful family home down in Ladysbridge in East Cork. Just goes to show you what you can do for remarkably good budgets. But you really have to love doing that kind of work. You have to love the old houses. You have to be able to stomach living in the old house with all the dust and the poor school uniforms needing to be washed at the last minute before the kids can go to school, and cooking by candlelight in the depths of winter and all that. I mean, you really have to love the house and be able to see the finishing line and to have a vision for what it's going to look like. But when you do, I mean, it's amazing what you can achieve. So tune in next week and we'll have another exciting podcast. So talk to you then.